And so what I'm a huge advocate of is helping guys reclaim their masculinity, reclaim their God-given inherent masculine traits, and seeing how empowered they are to do so much wonderful service in the world, and even in their own families by helping people feel safe. And it's something that hasn't really, it didn't really happen before, and it certainly isn't happening now, because you know, I get wives, you get wives that tell us all the time, you know, they want their men to, you know, be leaders, take charge, step up, take control. And men are scared to do that because they grew up with fathers who are also passive and they don't know how to do it.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I know that you are in for a good one today. Like, I'm just setting it up already. Your expectations should be so high. And I say that because I have a man on the other end today. You're looking at him if you're watching. You'll hear from him in a second. But I just immediately knew. So we met about, a couple of months ago now. We're in the same mastermind group together. I had been in for a little while, and he was invited in. And I immediately knew there was just something about Quentin that was just so different. He is very humble. He's super chill, but he's a total badass. And you would know that even if you saw the copy or the cover of his book, because he's the author of a book called Black Belt Husband. And that's not just like some cheesy title. Like, he's really just a badass. In addition to that, he's a husband and a father. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. So he actually has certification and credibility to talk about the things that he does. He's coaching men to help them become better in their relationships, but ultimately helping them to become better in their lives as the men that they've been created to be. So as you can tell, I'm pretty hyped up on it. But for now, Quentin Hafner, what's up, dude? Welcome.
Awesome, Ryan. It's quite the intro, man. I don't know what to say about all that, but I appreciate it.
See, that's the humility just coming through already. You're like,
I
so
know.
chill.
I'm just like, I just want to crawl out of the room. It's too much. No, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited. I'm excited to chat, and I really appreciated getting to know you too and our budding friendship. So let's. I look forward to hearing where this conversation goes.
All right. So what I do want to know is a question that I often ask everybody on the podcast. It's something that has become really kind of the driving force for season 2 of the podcast. We're talking about authenticity and authentic conversations, but it really now stems from this opportunity to talk about manhood in a world where, boy, is that distorted. So before I just show my cards to you, even though you kind of know, how would you describe or define manhood or masculinity?
Gosh, what a great question.
Thank you.
Truly, what a great question. What a great question. I'll give you some thoughts that are kind of rattling around in my head, and we can just kind of see where it goes. So one of the first things I think about when I hear you kind of asking that question is the difference between being a man and being good at being a man. And so when I think about masculinity in its most beautiful form, it's us being good at being men. But I think, of course, it's been kind of under attack lately. Of course, it's been under attack in the media, and I think it's been under attack for some really good reasons and some important reasons. But just like so many things, the pendulum always swings too far, and I think a lot of guys out there feel ashamed to own their masculinity, or they feel ashamed if they were to announce to the world that they're good at being men, because somehow I think that's become kind of like something that we shouldn't be proud of anymore. And I think because of that, it's creating a lot of problems in our culture.
Yeah, that's
does that make? Yeah, I don't know if that's landing on you in any way.
No. I think that's really good. So, I've tried to pry into this one with a couple of people on the show because I think it's so important. So where do you feel like, so you talk about, the distortions today, and some of them rightfully so. So, where do you feel like today in society, we've seen bad reactions to manhood and masculinity, bad distortions of it? And then where do you feel like I'll just say we in general as men have been called out in the right places and need to do a better job? And you could pick which lane you want to walk down first.
Well, I think historically, and sometimes I get in trouble kind of saying this, but
bring it.
I think that relationship problems are mostly the responsibility and the fault of men. And I say that as a man's man. I love my male clients. I love the world of men. I'm a huge proponent of masculinity. But the reason I say that is because men typically carry more power in relationships than women. And I think with that increased sense of power, we have a greater sense of responsibility to make sure that people inside the relationship feel safe. And so historically, I think if we look back in time and we kind of look at it more like sociologically, I think men have taken advantage of their power. They've taken advantage of the position of power that has been kind of bestowed to them. And if we look back, think, quintessential kind of, 1950s kind of family. And of course, it wasn't all bad, but there was a really big cultural shift that came out of that. We think, 1960s, the big feminist movement. And, the feminist movement was really born out of that space and time where women felt, disempowered generally in their systems, in their families.
Yep.
And I think that if we're going to be really honest about it, we have to look at that and say, we could probably understand that. There was a ton of abuse back then. There was unreported abuse. There was some really unfortunate things happening in our society at that time. And so, the onset of the feminist movement was born out of that as kind of a rebellion to masculinity. I don't even want to use that word. It was out of a rebellion to males and men abusing their power. And so we kind of fast forward into, 2022, and we're still kind of dealing with the repercussions of that. And what's happened in a different way is that the pendulum swung really far to the other side, and men have given up their power almost completely. And I'm using big generalizations. Of course, it doesn't apply to everybody, but men have given up their power. Men have acquiesced their masculinity to their partners, their wives. And so we've moved from being in this more dominant position in relationships and to being in a very passive position in relationships. So the average American husband today in 2022 is not a dominant partner at all. They've done a ton of studies on this. The average husband is in fact more passive and is married to a more dominant wife. And this is where we get all these cliches. My wife's a ball and chain, and all the
guys' balls are in the wife's
stuff that we have to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, all that stuff. She wears the pants, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I'm a huge advocate of is helping guys reclaim their masculinity, reclaim their God-given inherent masculine traits, and seeing how empowered they are to do so much wonderful service in the world, and even in their own families by helping people feel safe. And it's something that hasn't really, it didn't really happen before. And it certainly isn't happening now because, I get wives, you get wives that tell us all the time, they want their men to, be leaders, take charge, step up, take control, and men are scared to do that because they grew up with fathers who were also passive and they don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's so good. Gosh, there was like 9 things there that I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about that. Oh, we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to retreat. No, that's
Just
so good.
Time, yeah.
No. I loved it all because I love how you unpacked that in a way that gets us to present day. It's interesting because one of the things that kept coming up in my mind as you were sharing each of those things was, there's this quote that everybody today attributes to Peter Parker's uncle in Spider-Man when Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility, which really that goes all the way back to Voltaire. I don't necessarily know the context in which Voltaire was sharing that because I'm not a study of him, but it's so true. And so, and again, like I'm all for the overgeneralizations for right now, because I just think that most of us can take some learning from this. We have abused our power. We have abused the calling and role that God has on our lives by not taking responsibility or by abusing the responsibility. And so, to your point, like, going back to the 50s and the feminist movement, like guys were total douches back then, which is why the women had to rally together to stand up, to fight for themselves. Yes, there was not great things that came out of that movement. And not everything is perfect, but ultimately they had to do something because they were just like being dominated. And that's not what power, the power that we've been given it was ultimately, created to do. And then all the way to today, I love the fact that it's like most men are powerless, which is why we are seeing that so much of at least I believe, so much of the destruction and breakdown of society today overall is not because women are in power, but because men have just abdicated their responsibility and they have no power whatsoever. They have no voice, whether it's in the home or in society, and they have cowered. And the more that society pushes against that, the more men seem to cower.
Absolutely. And I think that there are some, unfortunately, I think that there's some institutions, i.e. the therapy community and the church as a whole, I think have done a really destructive job on helping men claim their power, but also teach them how to harness it for the greater good. And I think, and so because people in those communities haven't really understood how to do that, or, they come to the table with their own kind of unresolved baggage. What we do is we shame men, and we shame the hell out of them. And we tell them that they're bad and they're toxic, and that masculinity is toxic, and that they're destructive. And so as a way for men to cope in a society that's so shaming and antagonistic towards men become total pussies. And we, like you said, we cower, we advocate responsibility. We become very deferential and acquiescent, and we just say, okay, whatever you want. And then but simultaneously, it's not a good solution, because all these guys are, about to explode and filled with rage and resentment. And they do eventually, the champagne cork kind of pops and, they kind of do some really destructive things. So I was just reading this one statistic recently about, like, and I'm sure you know more about this, Ryan, than I do, but just about men really not going to church, and it was this, statistic about this like downward decline of, men not going to church, and like, how, most churches were really filled with women, and wives were trying to drag their men to church, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And I read that, and I thought it's the same thing as therapy, and it's the exact same thing as therapy. Women, they'll message me all the time. How can I get how can I get my guy to come? And he doesn't want to come. And I'm like, I don't blame him for not wanting to come, because he's talked to all his friends, and his friends have gone before, and they know what happens. The man gets, basically the shit kicked out of him, and then he has to pay for it. And he's like, I don't really want to do that. And so I think a lot of guys, they don't really have, this is a roundabout way of me trying to say that I don't think guys have spaces to know how to be masculine men in a safe way.
That's right.
I don't think that there's role models. I mean, I don't think your average pastor knows how to do that. I don't think your average therapist knows how to do that. And so guys are kind of just left on their own. And, there's, and then there's this whole online world now that people are kind of gravitating to. And that's why guys like Jordan Peterson have become so popular, is because he offers guys a little bit of that perspective about how to kind of stand on their own 2 feet in their masculinity without shaming them.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go farther down this thought process of, power and taking power. But I think that there is something else that has, and you just used one of the words there when we talk about shame. I think there's something else that has really destroyed men. And part of this is their responsibility. Part of this is because I don't think there's space for it. And it's, earlier you said, kind of like we're overwhelmed with all these like emotions. We've kind of been like just, stuffed off into the corner. We don't know how to do. So like all this rage and anger comes out. But so much of that even is the result of shame, of fear, of feelings of less than. It's all these like sadness. It's all of these things that for a long period of time, and even now in some circles, it's like men don't cry. Men don't talk about their emotions. Men don't like shame. Don't be a bitch, right? Like whatever, like, that has been also a part of this narrative. So it's all these competing things. And so I often find that because guys don't know where to go with their emotions, they end up not dealing with them. And then they just become far more destructive in their own lives and in their relationships because they don't, like, what do? Google, who do I talk to when I feel ashamed? Like, what guy would do that? And what the hell is going to come up on Google if you were to put something like that into a search bar? So do you see, you've counseled so many men and you're now coaching so many men. Like, do you see so many men struggling to figure out what to do with those types of emotions, which I guess I would consider, signs of at least thought to be weak or maybe feminine? I hear a lot of people say, oh, those are that's the feminine side of you or whatever. Like, do you see that?
1,000%. Yeah. 1,000%. And when I hear things in that kind of a narrative, like, man up, and I grew up with, I remember very vividly my dad telling me if I was crying as a little kid, he would say, you better stop crying or else I'm going to give you something to cry about. And so, he was that kind of stereotypical person who was so disconnected from his own emotions. He couldn't tolerate the emotions in other people. And so that kind of set me on a path in my own life of not feeling, feelings were weak, emotions were weak. And, that's another story, but that created a whole bunch of destruction in my own life. And so guys, as a general rule of thumb, if I was going to put
wait, before you give this, this opinion, I don't want to glaze over what you just said. And I would actually like to hear more about it because I think it's helpful, because there's a guy listening right now that had a similar experience growing up and they feel like they're the only person because no other guy has talked to them about that. And then they have no freaking idea how to grow from it or how to get out of it. So are you willing to share a little bit more? So you said like, you dealt with a parent relation, a father-son relationship like that, and it created all this destruction. So what did that look like for you through stages of life until you, I don't know, came to some realization that this isn't the way life's going to go anymore?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you stopped me. So what my dad, this is kind of like my father wound, and most guys walking around, if I guess let's just say all guys have kind of some kind of father wound. So my father wound was, I was very scared of my dad. He was a very intimidating force. He was a violent person. He was very scary. And so as a young person growing up, he would be the kind of person that you wouldn't dare show vulnerability or kind of weakness around. And so because of that, what I became really good at is hiding it all. I became really good at being, I became really good at feigning strength and feigning having it together. But deep inside, there was just a mountain of pain. There was so much sadness. There was so much fear, but I could never acknowledge any of those emotions. I could never talk to anybody about any of those emotions. I could never even, kind of mention them. And so what I had to do, and what anybody would do in this kind of situation, is that we learn how to suppress. And, suppression is just that fancy kind of psychological word to describe kind of burying your feelings. And we just kind of bury our feelings. We push them down and we push them down and we push them down. And how it eventually came out in my life is that in my teenage years, I would get in trouble at school for fighting or for having some outburst in a class. And then fast forward, I eventually got married in my mid-20s, and I was the biggest rageaholic in my own marriage. And it ended up resulting in my first wife's leaving me. And that anger that I felt, and I know that there's somebody listening to this that can resonate with this, but that anger I felt was all a byproduct of all those years pushing my feelings down and pushing my feelings down and pushing my feelings down. And that's the thing about suppression, is that we do it in the short run. It never really works in the long run. And we end up taking all that sadness and that hurt and that fear. That's what I did. And it kind of morphs into just being really pissed off all the time. And my anger was the thing that caused a lot of havoc in my life. It got me in a lot of trouble. I mean, I think by the grace of God, I'm not in jail, for doing something stupid because of that anger. But it caused a whole bunch of other failed marriage and, broken relationships with friends. And then it kind of set me on a path. Eventually I found myself in a therapist's office and uncovering all that historical hurt that had been kind of buried inside of me since the age of 5.
How did you find yourself in a therapist's office?
So going through the divorce, my divorce, I ended up, I think I was 27 when I got a divorce. I was married for a very short time, a couple of years. And, it was kind of like the tipping point in my life. It was like the catalyst in my life where all my coping mechanisms, everything that I knew how to kind of get through life, just stopped working. I couldn't really function anymore. I became very depressed. I became suicidal. I kept thinking that, basically if this was life, it wasn't really worth living. And truly out of a place of desperation, I asked somebody at church if they had, a recommendation for like a psychologist. I didn't even know what therapy was. I didn't know, but I guess I had enough experience where someone said maybe like, oh, you should try that or something. And so out of a desperate place, I reached out to somebody, and it really became a life-changing event for me, like over the course of like 7 or 8 years. And of course, not everybody needs to be in therapy that long, but I come from a really extensive trauma history. I had a lot of stuff to kind of unwrap. And it's, of course, it became, my experience in therapy became the reason I became a therapist. It's why I'm so passionate now about helping people who, have gone, through their own struggles, because, by the grace of God, I've kind of come out the other side, and I'm in such a different place now. So I really know I really have a redemptive story. And so as that kind of optimistic person that I am, I'm always wanting to kind of offer that to other people and give them the experience that I've had.
Dude, what I love so much. I mean, first of all, there are so many things in there that if we were offline and having our own conversation, I would share all the similarities that you and I have, which is just fascinating to me. I can't wait to get together and hang out in a few weeks and talk some more about that. But to me, assessing the whole situation, I believe for the first time in your life, you making a commitment to go to therapy was the first time you really demonstrated your manhood. And I just think that that's so incredible. It's not that you didn't do manly things before, and it's not that you never, that you were all awful all the time, but so many men, and I've been here more than once, we find ourselves imprisoned to this life that we've created for ourselves. You talked earlier about just stuffing the frustration down, stuffing the anger down. I can deal with it. I can deal with my own shame. If I'm in a crowd, do it in pride, whatever, just stuffing it. And we become imprisoned to that. We're fighting so hard against it. And regardless of whether it was desperation or not, there were other ways out. In theory, at least, self-medication, suicide, there were just a lot of other things you could have done, but you took probably one of the most difficult roads possible to stand some stranger in the face or stare some stranger in the face and tell them that you were a mess, or that you were messed up, or that you were desperate. Men are not conditioned to do that and to say that. It's back to your dad's thing. It's dude, tough it out. Quit being such a sissy. And I think it's incredible, Quentin, that again, regardless of how much God had to beat you up to get you to that place, that is just unreal to me. How much that demonstrates true manhood. It's just, it's so fascinating to me. So you step out on this journey, and kind of now back to, which again, I think it's super helpful for guys to hear. I pray that there's not people listening that are at that place where it's I'm at the end of myself. I'm contemplating really terrible things that, nothing else left but to try this. But now here you are, and you're encouraging so many men in this. And so how do you feel as you've been on this journey? How are you trying to, because you talked about redemption now, how are you trying to help men redeem their masculinity, their manhood? Where are the things that come to the surface for you that are these are some of the first things that I really want people to hear and talk about, because I feel either they align with who you are or there are significant challenges that people are facing. So are there a few things that you really gravitate towards?
I think I'm understanding your question. I'll answer it in the way I think I'm understanding it. So, being a therapist to men, it's such a privilege. And I'm not saying this in a cheesy cliche way. I'm just saying in a very sincere way. It's such a privilege because, I know when guys reach out to me, they're in a really tough place. And to feel, it's such an honor, and I respect my clients so much for all the things that you were saying about my experience. And I appreciate what you're saying, because I remember it as if it was yesterday, sitting in my therapist's office in that very first appointment, and my hands were just shaking, and I was sweating, and my heart was racing, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what this person was going to ask me. And I was terrified of what road he might go down, or, what thing he was going to uncover in me. And I truthfully, I was that way for probably the first year in therapy, every single appointment, feeling so nervous. And, and I have this weird kind of dichotomy that I feel like has shaped my life, and it's shaped my work so much too. I grew up with this really kind of archetype, traditional, masculine guy. Okay. By my definition of masculinity, he's not really masculine, but I'm just using that word because everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I grew up, and all my role modeling and my influencing and all my belief systems were wrapped up in this kind of guy. And then I had this experience in therapy where I started getting in touch with my emotions and feeling and crying and, sitting in the presence of another man and just feeling, just overwhelmed with sadness and, talking about, my life experience or something that I was going through. And so what happened for me is like, I felt so perplexed, like, how can these worlds coexist? Like, I grew up with a father and he was a man and he was this way. And then now I'm sitting in this therapist's office and now I'm having this total other experience that was so contradictory to my childhood. And so it was like, well, what is a man? What, like, back to your kind of very original question, what is a man? And I kind of really wrestled with that for a really long time and trying to kind of understand, was it this or was it that? And, being shaped and influenced, by other people. And at the end of the day, what I realized that it was both. And to integrate both aspects is essential for healthy masculinity and healthy manhood. I think there is an aspect inside us men that are inherently violent. We know how to destruct and we know how to kill, and it's in our DNA. And there's no amount of progressive thinking that's going to get rid of that. And also, we are emotional creatures and we have feelings. And just because we have a penis doesn't mean that we don't get sad. It doesn't mean that we don't get scared. And that it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to admit that you're scared and that you're needing help. Going back to our mastermind group, and like the whole essence of that group is about, or not the whole essence, but a big part of it is like, hey, I'm struggling. I need help with something. Could you guys help me with something? I can honestly say that I don't even know. I mean, it must have taken me 30 years of my life before I ever asked another man for help, because that was a sign of weakness. So merging those two worlds has been really kind of like my passion, and helping men merge those two worlds and understand the essentialness of merging those two worlds to live a really high quality life.
Gosh. So as you were sharing, I couldn't help but think, and good Lord, there's going to be someone that's listening to this right now, and you are going to be so offended by what I'm going to say. And it just is what it is. With such a distortion of gender today, and this idea that you are what you think you are versus what God created you to be, in so many ways was just so perfectly answered with what you said without me asking a question like that, and without me saying that that's the answer you were trying to give. But we live in a society that says, like to men, if you're a young boy and you play with girl toys, or I think there's still some boundaries that we need to keep here, but if you feel this way, then maybe you should think about the fact that you're maybe not a man or a boy, you're a girl, which is crazy to even think that like they're telling our kids this, but like, it's so distorted because, we've gone with like kind of how you feel and how you experience life dictating who you are, who you were created to be and your identity. And yet you just painted this beautiful picture. And obviously it's going to work itself out differently because some men have tendencies towards maybe a strength on one side versus a strength on the other. And that's totally okay. But you just talked about this integration of what I'm going to call like the rough and tumble, the tough, the protector, the fighter, the structure, working with my hands, like that kind of side of quote unquote manhood. And then at the same time, you talked about the necessity to experience and express emotion, the crying, the humility, the dealing with shame. Like it's like, this is how we were created to begin with. And again, you may swing somewhat to one side or the other, but you need to understand that as a man, we were created with both. And if we don't fight to keep both integrated, we begin to lose a sense of who we are. And then the distortion just runs wild. Like,
yeah,
wild.
Very well said. Yeah, I think that very well said, Ryan. And I think culture, culture is getting it completely wrong. And, but so let me say it this way. Culture's reaction or response to a problem is completely wrong. But the problem is important to address. Their way of dealing with it is insanity. But the problem is important to address. And part of the problem is what we're talking about right now, that, if a 13-year-old boy is more sensitive and he's been, he grew up to believe, that expression of emotion was wrong or bad, or that he would be threatened for something like that. And then, he's with his peer group at school and they say, oh, well, maybe you're a girl, because you have these kind of traditional feminine qualities because he is more sensitive. And then all of a sudden, so that's the way of dealing with it that I don't believe is accurate or correct. But the problem is still valid. And the problem is that a sensitive young 13-year-old boy is not supposed to feel, because that's not what boys do. And if he has those feelings inside of a locker room, or if he's scared, or he doesn't want to play on the football team because that feels overwhelming to him, then he gets teased, because we still are dealing with the remnants of that old way of looking at masculinity. And we haven't been able to do the integration at a young age, because most of the dads out there, I'm not saying this in a shitty way towards dads, but the dads haven't learned it either. And so they do the same thing to their kids, and then it just repeats itself. And
I love that you said that too. Like, I feel like every problem in America today has just kind of been piled on the millennial generation. When in reality, these have been problems that have been perpetuated for generation after generation. And wherever we are in this time spectrum, or, wherever we're at in season of life, we need to realize more than likely that we're some part of the problem, that we can offer some part of the solution, but we've got to be willing to go for it. We've got to be willing to step into it and do it. We can't just stand back, cross our arms, and hope that things change. And I believe that as men, part of our responsibility is to stand up and lead the way, to go first. Like we can't, it is scary. It's scary to talk about manhood and gender particularly as a white Christian male. Like there's no worse person in society today to be talking about these topics. Like, I've been annihilated when I talk about this. This clip is going to go on social media, I'm sure, because it's a good one. And somebody is going to message me and tell me how bigoted and entitled and awful I am for saying the things that I did. But it's like, we have to be willing. Again, back to great power comes great responsibility. Like, we need to be willing to say, like, for whatever part God's called me to play, I'm going to step up and I'm going to play, and I'm going to be willing to take whatever shit's coming my way, because like, it's my calling. It's my responsibility. Too many of us have just stood back and just hoped somebody else was going to do something about it. And then there's one guy that we're like, oh, see that guy, he's doing it. Like you talk about Jordan Peterson, which he has done a great job in so many ways, or Joe Rogan, and stepped into it in so many ways. And it's like, I love that. I love to see that. But at the same time, like it's going to take more than two. It's going to take us all playing our part. And yet, if we would do that, not only do we have an opportunity to turn society, but I think more importantly, we have an opportunity to impact the people that God has put right into our circle, right? Which is something that you're spending so much time on, like this marriage relationship and family, like that's where it starts, right?
Yeah, 100%. We're talking about, big names, but we don't need to be big names. And, there's anybody listening to this, I want to just remind everybody listening to this that everybody listening to this is a leader. You have some sphere of influence in your life. Somebody looks up to you. Somebody admires you. Somebody is looking at you as a role model for how to do life. And, since we're talking about guys, and masculinity and manhood, consider this an invitation to grow in this area. Because what I find, we're talking about these dichotomies of what I think healthy masculinity is. It's on one hand, tapping into the kind of ancestral DNA that's inside of us that was, that had to go hunt lions. And then there's this more sensitive feeling aspect. So we're talking about integrating those two aspects. And I find today, most guys don't know how to do either one of them.
That's right.
Most guys couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And most guys have no idea what they're feeling at any given time. And so you have a bunch of kind of shell of men. And I'm saying this so empathetically. I'm not condemning guys. I'm not trying to insult anybody listening to this. I want to invite you into a more robust life, a more full life, where you're going to be the big beneficiary, where I'm going to be, as I grow and I get better at merging these two worlds, I'm the big beneficiary. And so, we have to start with ourselves. We can't teach this to somebody if we don't really do it ourselves. We can't say, oh, you need to be this way if we don't really do it ourselves. And so I just, I fail at it often, but my whole thing is that, I try to live it. And what I've experienced is that the more I live it, the more rewarding and fruitful my life really seems to become.
Yeah. I mean, and even in the failure, like get over it. You are going to fail. You're going to screw up. As a matter of fact, some of the times, this, right? Like the best way to demonstrate character is to show people how you react when you fail, how you admit to it, how you repent of it. If it was something intentional that you did, how you reconcile the situation, redeem the situation, learn and grow from it and move forward. Again, like that's such a, people always say like, I don't fail. I learn, whatever. And it's like, dude, you failed. Own that, be a man about it, like own it, and then show the world or your wife and kids at home how you're going to deal with it and lead that way. But we just run, right? We just totally run.
Yeah, we run because we have to, in order for anybody to admit wrongdoing, be humble, have that kind of self-awareness, for me to raise my hand and say, what, I'm a total fuck up and I failed. We have to be strong enough to be willing to do that, and I'm not saying that I get it wrong too. Sometimes there's so many opportunities where I could have taken better responsibility, but it's scary to take responsibility. But I think the more we can, tap into that God-given strength that is inherent, it's like inside of our bones, we can say, you know what? Yeah, I screwed up. I failed. And, hopefully we are surrounding ourselves with safe people. Going back to my childhood, my childhood wasn't safe enough
Mm.
to admit wrongdoing. It wasn't safe enough to be humble. It wasn't safe enough to say that I failed, because there would be some really negative repercussion.
Yeah.
So this goes back to a community comment that you mentioned, that you said earlier. I think that for guys listening to this, we have to have a band of brothers in our lives that that we can work this stuff out with. Guys that will support us and accept us, but also challenge us. And if we don't have that, we're going to really struggle. We're going to spend our life kind of on an island, trying to probably, piecemeal it together. And it's probably not going to work that good. And I'm just, on a personal note, I'm very thankful for you, Ryan, and our group, because I know that if something was going on in my life, or I was really struggling right now, I know that it's a safe place so I could open up to you guys. And I know you guys would be there for me, and nobody would judge me, and you guys would challenge me and hold me accountable to living. And unfortunately, a lot of, like 99.9% of guys in the world don't have that.
Yep. Because again, like, we aren't sure if it exists. We don't know where to go to figure out whether it exists or not. And it's scary as all hell to admit that we need it. And so there are so many things that are warring against our call to be men. And yet I believe that through, hopefully, platforms like a podcast like this, platforms like the book that you wrote, the groups that you're facilitating to coach, and still, working with people as a therapist. I pray that as we continue to push forward with trying to communicate this message, again, not as know-it-alls, but as people that are on the journey with them, that we will start to show more men that there are opportunities to step into that aspect of manhood and to lead well, and to accept that power and to take responsibility. Like, there is just such an opportunity for us, but you got to want it. You got to want it.
My old jiu-jitsu coach used to say this, and it just rings true into our conversation right now. He used to say that your hardest day in jiu-jitsu is your very first day walking through those front doors. Just showing up and not knowing what's going to happen, and the nerves and the angst. And that's kind of our invitation. That's kind of what we're saying right now too. And sometimes we just have to walk through the door, or knock at the door, or ask somebody, is there a door around here? It's the hardest first step. But once we muster enough courage to take that first leap, then we usually find that there is a pot of gold for us on the other side of it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm landing right there, because I think that if you're listening right now, that was your invitation. Like, this is the call to arms. This is the altar call. Like, whatever you're feeling right now, you need to hear Quentin just say that there is a door that is wide open, but nobody can force you to step through it. And so if Quentin's that guy, I cannot stand behind him enough and tell you that you need to reach out to him. He has walked the walk, as you've heard parts of it. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to tell you more if you reach out to him. He is continuing to push himself to be better and better every single day. He's created environments for you to be able to safely and comfortably do that. And at the same time, he's going to push you to get very, very uncomfortable. So if you want to reach out to Quentin, you can do that. We'll make sure to put his contact information in the show notes. But dude, thank you so much. I mean, I knew we were going to have a great conversation. We were talking before offline that we were both kind of tired, because even though we were at different times in our day, we both felt like we were at the end of our day and at the end of ourselves. And yet I have just been given so much life by this conversation. I've just grown and just felt so much from what you've said. So dude, I cannot tell you just how much I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been an honor, and I've really enjoyed our conversation too. I feel like we could keep going on and on. So maybe we'll plan a second one of these.
Yeah, no, we should for sure. And if you want to hear that, reach out to us and let us know. Yep, we want you to keep going. We want you to keep talking. We'd love to hear from you. As I said, if you want to reach Quentin, you can do so. Contact information will be in the show notes on all the platforms. If you need me, you know where to find me. I'll take all your positive and negative feedback and anything else in between. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, to watch, whatever you're doing. If this episode hit you somewhere, please share it. There are a lot of other men. There's also a lot of women out there that are listening. They want to share this with their husbands, want to share this with their friends so they can share this with their husbands. Please, please, please share. That's one of the best things that you can do just to continue to push this message forward. In the meantime, no matter what else you do, please remember to be you, be happy, be authentic. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.